Welcome, guys. Good to see you guys. We had a little sabbatical. I got to go to Florida. It was awesome. I tell you, it is nicer in Florida than it is here. Like when I mowed yesterday, I thought that I was dying here, and I can say that. And down in Florida, I think I only had one day down there that I thought like it was the end of the world. Like it was so hot. We had perfect overcast weather to attack those Disney parks because it's definitely more of a trip than it is a vacation for adults. Because I think I pulled a hammy down there. I've been telling everybody I think I pulled a hamstring. Trying to keep up with the kids, but we're grateful and thank you guys for being understanding, and hopefully you guys tapped into some other services, checked out some other good stuff. But we're going to pick up and attack where we left off, talking about the pillars of focus ministry and what we believe that God has kind of set this footprint through the Apostle Paul on where we should be going, the things that should be important to us to help us get to our purpose, to help us discover our purpose not only individually but collectively. And so last week, or the week prior, we talked about living the life that we've been given. We broke down that 1 Corinthians 7:17, talked about how from face value, it can be deceptive that it's just talking about marriage, because that set of scriptures is talking about it. You know, if you need to be married, be married. If you don't want to be married, don't be married. You know, and then Paul actually says in that letter, "Let's wish everybody was like me and didn't have to be married." But ultimately, there's more in that, because then he makes that statement that right where you are right now is where God wants you to be. So live that life that you've been given. Live that purpose out in your life. And I think a lot of what we discover, at least what I see culturally and in our community, and then intimately in our schools, and then intimately in my own family, is that lack of purpose. Like folks don't understand that there's a greater purpose in their life, that they're called to something better, there's something bigger speaking into them. And so I think that's why you see the rising statistics in suicide, you see the rising statistics in violent crime, because we have minimized life. Like life is not what it used to be. It's not coveted, it's not cherished, it's not precious. It's we treat our bodies like an amusement park. We don't take care of it, realizing that we only got one, and we got to do the best that we can with it. And then mentally, we don't take care of it mentally. And I think I believe it all goes back to Scripture. It all goes back to the Word. That the Word is what defines our purpose. And for all those folks out there that are wandering around aimlessly and bouncing from here to bouncing to there, relationship status to occupations to schools to back to my parents' house, out of my parents' house to a friend's house, it's so much confusion in the world. And I think that what Focus wants to do is focus on the person. Focus on them, because even the scary part in learning this as a pastor, that even the folks that seem to be stable and are going to church on a regular basis and have good community connections are just as lost as the person that just came stumbling in for the first time. And it's heartbreaking to see that you see folks that are on face value doing all the right things, but haven't yet tapped into what God has in store for them. So we tackled living the last time. And today, the next pillar that Paul tells us is to obey. To simply obey. You have to obey. And so I believe obedience is the starting point. It is the starting line. Obedience is the starting point to greater things in your life. And I think about that to make it set in and go home, like when you have children, or when we were children and we had our parents, if I obeyed my parents, I knew there was good things to come. But if I disobeyed my parents, there was going to be a bad day. Like I knew that things weren't going to go the way. When my children don't do the appropriate things, it's not. But hey, if you can keep Dad happy and the things were done right, or I did what was said, I met the expectations that were for me at school. I did the right things. I responded the right way. I got along with my siblings. Those are some simple things. There's rules in everything that we do in life, but we try to say like there's not. To all the rule breakers out there, we try to say that. I don't need rules. I don't need these stinking rules. But there's rules in every facet of our life, and that's good because that's healthy. There's rules in society. Whether it's you agree with the speeding ticket that you got, or the parking ticket, or there's rules entering a place of business, how to stand in line. Like, can you imagine being at Disney World and just watching people cut in and out because nobody followed the rules of the line? Like that would cause a lot of rifts, same thing if you were Chick-fil-A and somebody cut in front of you in line, even in the most peaceful environment, people could probably flip out, or let's even break it down to church in the coffee bar and somebody just cut in front of you, we have these basic unwritten rules in society that, okay, Aaron's in line, let me just get behind Aaron, let me wait my turn. And then every now and then, because we don't see past it, we make a fool of ourselves, because then we realize they're not even in line in the first place. Like when you're waiting at Disney World and there's like, everything's on an app now. I don't know if you've been there, like it's all on an app. It tells you how long the wait is. But when you're standing there for 15 minutes and the people in front of you didn't move and all of a sudden you realize you're not even part of the line in the first place, that should have been looking for the guy that's holding the sign that says end of the line here, and didn't see that guy, so we learned that lesson pretty quick. But there's those unwritten rules. So we have the rules in school. There's things that we have to obtain to meet a specific academic credit or whatnot to graduate. There's rules through every relationship we have in our life. Not just the intimate relationships of husband and wife or boyfriend and girlfriend, but we have rules with our friends. Like my buddies know that this is, you don't cross this line, and I know certain friends that you don't cross that line, or you don't say this, or you don't do that. We set these rules up in our life. And there's an expectation for obedience. The people that you allow into your inner circle, your close-knit group of friends, you expect some honor and integrity for those rules that you have. Or like when you bring friends over to your house, you expect them to speak and be appropriate around your spouse or your family and make sure, listen, don't make a fool of yourself here. This is my house. We have rules. And so they're healthy to have rules. So I think that when you get down to it, the starting point to everything that we do in our life comes down to obedience. Because in obedience, you wouldn't stay friends with a person that continually insulted you, or didn't act right when you got out to big social settings, or they embarrassed you, or they talked foul all the time, or they insulted your family, or insulted your spouse, or you wouldn't, that would be a violation of that relationship. And there would be some consequences to that. There would be, whether it is consequences of distancing that relationship, or, hey man, I'm going to need you to kind of really, listen, I appreciate you don't talk to my family like that, clean it up a little bit, Willie. You do little things like that. We have those things, right? And then you expect a return on that. Because an act of obedience is followed by an act of surrender. Like when you're in those settings, or if I go to your all's house and you guys got a set of rules, like maybe you go into your house and we got to remove our shoes. As much as I hate removing my shoes, I don't want to remove my shoes, but it's an act of surrender because this is not my house. This is your house. And I need to be obedient to that. If I respect you, then I'm going to be obedient to that. And so I'm going to remove my shoes because that's what you've asked of me. And because I value that relationship. And the same thing comes with our Heavenly Father. Like when you truly embrace and live the life that you've been given, the gift of life, because it's a gift, and you embrace some of the things that He has done for you and in you and through you and around you, then you start realizing that it goes back to that relationship with God. It's a relationship. It's not a dictatorship. It's not authoritative. It's a relationship. It's a give and take. And when God speaks to you and He's talking to you intimately and He's leading you, it's an act of surrender. Because you can know God. There's a lot of people that know God. There's a lot of people that participate with God. But there's a heck of a lot more people that don't obey God. Because oftentimes, the obedience, that the part that we struggle with is that surrender side of it. Like we know what we should do, but I don't want to surrender to do that. And so that's where we end up struggling with it. It's a part of our regular way of life. And it's something that oftentimes, why we incorporate rules and everything in our everyday life, but yet we don't incorporate rules when it comes to our relationship with our Heavenly Father. And the crazy thing about it, especially for those of us that are married, is that Christ's representation of what our relationship with God should be is the marriage relationship. And yet in every marriage, every healthy marriage has rules. And yet we don't ever bring those rules of obedience when it comes to God. We don't ever, that's a second thought. We don't think about obeying God and surrendering to God like that, truly surrendering like you would your spouse. Like there are moments that we have to give and take to our spouse, so that things go smoothly, things go right. There's things that we sacrifice at the foot of our home. Let's for that sake, because I want to make sure my spouse is happy. But we don't want to surrender stuff at the foot of the cross out of an act of obedience to God, because let's be honest, what people can't see, people don't know. But yet we forget that he can see it all, and he knows it all already. So we're going to continue that talk with picking up Moses. We talked about Moses. Moses is a perfect figure to talk about his struggles through life and embracing who he is and where he came from and how he went. I believe, even though Paul talked about this stuff in 1 Corinthians, I believe that Moses is living it. And so we pick up Moses here in chapter 4, and it's just fascinating. We got to where Moses, remember the last time we were together and Moses ticked off God, out of all the doubts and all the, how can I do this, whatnot, the only thing that made God mad was when Moses minimized who he was. When Moses minimized himself, said that I am not adequate enough. I cannot do this. I remember Moses says, I can't speak. I've never been a good speaker. And then the scripture tells us that God burned with anger. And so, when you hate on yourself, when you're, despising on yourself, even in your worst of worst moments, let's remember Moses. Moses murdered somebody. Moses murdered somebody, and Moses ran and hid. And God still plucked him out. He's had a come to God moment with a burning bush, and yet all that amazing stuff happened, yet he still doubted who he was and what he was equipped to do. And then the only thing out of all that made God mad is when Moses minimized who he was, when he said that I'm not good enough, God. And then God looked at him and said, I've equipped you. I've made you perfect. I've now numbered the hairs on your head. I know everything about you. And I've called you, I've chosen you, I've picked you for a reason. But God being God allows him to have a helper and gives him air. And so what we pick up here now is God is giving Moses his call. He's telling him what he's got to do. And so going back and looking at Moses in those previous chapters and how terrified and how scared and how wishy-washy he was. And should I do this? Should I? I can only imagine that the same man that ran out of fear, the same man that doubted God, the same man that tried to question God out of picking him, and the same man that said, I'm not good enough. I can only imagine when this call came to him, he's like, whoa, wait a minute. I got to do what? Go back to where I ran from? So he said, we pick this up in chapter 4, and it says, now the Lord had said to Moses and Midian, go back to Egypt. I can imagine, if you even stopped right there when God said, go back to Egypt, go back to the place that you murdered somebody, go back to the place that Pharaoh wanted to kill you. Now I want you to go back. For all the men who wanted to kill you are dead. So they're dead. So he tries to confirm them. Listen, the Pharaoh's dead. There's a new Pharaoh in town, so maybe they'll forget about it. So maybe he's thinking, okay. So Moses took his wife and his sons and put them on a donkey, and he started back to Egypt. And he took the staff of God in his hand. So God had performed a miracle with the staff, so showing him that he's all powerful. And the Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do. But that's great. If God had stopped there, just like if God had said, Ben, listen, if you and your team step out and launch Focus, I promise that it will be fruitful in a year, right? Like we expect, that's sometimes how we look at obedience as conditional. We want that. And so for Moses, okay, so he told him to go back. I would have stopped there and got scared. But then he followed up and said, but everybody that wanted to kill you is gone. And so he packed up and he listened and he says, now I want you to go and do all the things that give you power to do, right? But then God goes in this, but it's the buts in the Bible that hurt the most. Because then you're like, oh, man. And he says, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Well, then God, why am I going if you already know that it's not going to work? And that what you do in our everyday life is, God, why would you ask me to go talk to that individual? Why would you ask me to take that chance, that moment, when you know, God, that they're not going to listen to me? They haven't listened to me the 7 times before this. Why would they listen to me now? I've tried to be nice. I've tried to suck it up and be the good person and the better person, and it's just not working. So I'm just going to start fighting fire with fire. Then they say to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord says. Israel is my firstborn son, and I told you, let my son go, so he may worship me. But you refuse to let him go, so I will kill your firstborn. So basically what God is doing is he is foretelling everything that's going to happen in Exodus in the very beginning. So he doesn't tell Moses that, listen, I'm going to send you back, and it's going to be great. He sends Moses back and says, you're going to go back, and it's not going to be great. They're not going to listen to you. They're not going to believe you. And I don't know about you, that sometimes right there can be extremely hard to accept. And in our life, it's like when you paint this picture of Moses, oftentimes that's what, like, especially if you dig into who Moses is and his character and his doubting self, like, could you imagine just focusing on the hardships that are to come? Like, even that on the other side of obedience, sometimes, like, when we look at it as a contingent thing, when we look at it on the other side of obedience, like our children know, Connor knows, if I do X, Y, and Z, mom and dad will do this. Maybe they'll take us for ice cream. But if I don't, I'm not like we do that as adults. We can minimize it and say we do it for our kids, but we do it as adults. If I do this on this end, something else, I'll get this at the end of it. I mean, I hate to admit this, and I think Carrie stepped out, but like we're starting to bribe our children about staying in the bed. Like we're like, if you stay in your bed for 5 consecutive days, we will take you to Target. And what like Target is like, I don't know. Target is like Toys R Us back in the day for me, for them. Like 5 consecutive days, we'll go to Target. You know, so they know, like out of an act of obedience, if I can stay in here for 5 consecutive days, nights, then I can get a Target and get a toy. But if it falls through, then they don't get it. It's we do things like that though, but we do that as adults. Like we go into our jobs and we have this expectation, like I won't do more than what my job description tells me to do. You ever had that argument with somebody at work? Managing people and dealing with people? It's not my job description. You know, it's not part of what I need to obey. So, because you want something out of it. And so I can only imagine that Moses is looking at this and he's thinking that you're sending me back and it's going to stink, it's going to be awful. Like, why am I even going back if you already know they're not going to let us go. He's not going to let us go worship. And then you say this whole little thing at the end, now you're going to kill the firstborn. Like, does that include us? Like, that's how he leaves it. And I know that, like, Moses has got a choice right now. Do I obey? Or do I just say that this is too hard? Do I say that this is too hard and I just bow out, choose somebody else, go against God, even though he's already said choose somebody else and God still has ignored him and still anointed him and still using him? See, we focus on those hard things and instead of focusing on what God wants us to see. See, God wants us to see him through the obedience. You know, it's not necessarily what we want to get out of it. It's just obeying the call that he's given us. And then on the back end of it, just know and have the faith to believe that something good's going to come out of it, that he has got a plan for this. See, just like our children, like that whole thing I said about our kids, like oftentimes when God says go, we often say, well, I obey, now give me. Like we want that fast return. And that's what Moses does. Moses ends up going. And like then it's like that immediate giving. Like give me, like I did what you asked. I came back. Now give me something. Give me something. So like maybe I'll self-confess, the Target thing may not be the best idea, but at least if it gets me some peaceful nights of sleep, I'll do it. And I'll do it again. We're still trying to find a better way. I'm not saying that's every parent's best way to do that, but that's what we're battling with. But I look at, that's often how we are as little children. God, I did what you asked me to. Now give me what I want. Give me what I asked for. Like, God, I went to church today. Why is Monday awful? Why did this situation not get better? Like, we have a contingency plan. Like, I obeyed you, and now I expect this to happen. And that's not how it works. That's the challenge of obedience. The challenge of obedience is we often think that if I obey, that it's the path of least resistance. Like we talk about the narrow path of righteousness and the broad path that leads to destruction, that we think that when we obey God and we do the right things by God, that a lot of people have this false vision that it'll be the path of least resistance, that narrow path will be no bumps, no bruises, no battering, no scars, no wounds, no mean people, no awful situations, no death, no sickness. But that's not the case. It's not. There will be trouble. There will be hardships. There will be letdowns. There will be deceptions. It's life. Like even though you did obey, it's still going to be life. And life, we all know, is challenging. It's full of bumps and bruises, and you got to protect yourself and those that you're leading and those that you're talking to about that false sense of God. And see, that's what I see in the church a lot of times, is we give this false sense of security to folks that just because you receive Christ, just because you were baptized, just because you come to church on Sunday, just because you participate every now and then in a small group, just because every now and then you do a good deed and you help out, that there's this false sense that I'm obeying what God has commanded me in the Bible, superficially, and I believe that things don't go bad. And if that is what your foundation of your faith is on, then the first thing that comes to mind when the world starts crumbling around you is you start blaming God. And you start backing out. And you start saying, like, I'm out of this. Like, I'm heading to Charlotte, North Carolina today. And for an awesome training, one for a chaplaincy training. So I'm really excited for that. But I'll tell you, the reason I'm bringing it up is I'll go down and I will listen to the starting point, the Andy Stanley series starting point. One of my favorite discs in there is, it's either the first or the second one, because I like them both. But it's, he talks about why bad things happen. And like how it, and he talks about, like, I think when the starting point was created, it was talking about when we had that great tsunami out in the Pacific, and how the destruction that did to, I think it was Indonesia, and like talks about bringing up, he's talking about life and real news feeds and what they're saying, people of faith are saying, and I'm like, if your foundation is rooted in what God is doing in the world, then you're missing the point. Like, I love what he says in there, and it's stuck with me for a long time, is you shouldn't ask why God is doing this. It should flip to who is this God? Who is God that these things happen? And what God will do through these things. And they are awful. But you think about those acts of obedience. If your heart, if your soul, if your idea of who God is completely based on the outcome of every situation in your life and the obedience in your life, then you're going to be let down. And that's why you see so many Christians just walk away from church, because they were let down by a pastor. They were let down by the kids ministry. Kids ministry, you guys, the kids ministry was awful. They wasn't attended, and they weren't teaching anything good, so I'm taking my kids somewhere else. Yeah, oh my gosh, what happened to love people? What happened to be a problem solver? Like, there was a problem, then we get involved in help. Like, we don't have that anymore. And it's because we think that following that path of obedience is the path of least resistance, and it's all going to be perfect. But obedience is not perfect. Obedience is hard. Surrender is hard. That's the challenge of being obedient, is first surrendering yourself to go do something for somebody else. And then on the other side of that is obedience. On the other end, when you aren't obedient, hurts. You know, when God did, nobody likes to be disciplined. Nobody likes to be held accountable. I don't look so much at God's discipline. I look at more of what happens in our life sometimes is God's accountability. God sends people in our lives to hold us accountable. Then, what you said was not right. Then, how you treated your children were not right. You need to apologize to your sons. You need to go do this. You need to do, you know, we all have those moments. It's becoming a Christian it was one of the most incredible decisions. It's amazing. It's great. It's awesome. But it is not absence of its challenges. It's so full of challenges. It's hard to live this way because it's not the way the world lives. It is, especially for us adults can probably hack it better than most, but it's still hard for us. But I look at like our young adults, our teenagers, our college students that have to make that conscious choice on their own to be who they are. I mean, raising your daughters, I mean, they all go their different routes. We're having a son in college and trying to adapt to him coming home, and like now that he's been gone for a year, now he's home, and like how do you deal with that? How do you, as a parent, when you let them go and you're like, man, to do everything right? Will they? Did I set them up for success? Did I help them be strong enough to take it on? Will they still? I think the biggest question I had letting Ethan go is, will he still be obedient to God? Will he still love God without having me over and saying, let's get time to go to church. Hey, let's go to church on Wednesday. Hey, let's do this. Let's come pray as a family. Let's pray at dinner. Will our children do that? Have we put that sense in them to be confident enough to still obey when they're away from what they know? And that's something that each parent has to think about. But we have these beliefs like that, and that's when you let your children go, that's the first time that they're actually going to receive some sort of resistance from the world. Because for the longest time, they always had us to bounce back to. and come back to. And they still do. They pick up the phone call, but it's not having that insulation and covering that a parent can provide. But ultimately, that's the insulation and the covering that we should be asking for from God too, to help us be able to resist those urges that when problems come and worries come and stresses come and anxieties come and all these things that bounce at us that tell us don't obey, just go do this, it's easier. Because often not obeying is easier than actually obedience. Obedience sometimes just stinks. It's hard to do what God wants us to do. I could have stayed at Rock Spring and been absolutely comfortable and just sat back and said, you know what, just go roll with the punches. Let's just do my thing. I could absolutely have chosen at work not to pursue promotion and just roll with the punches, finish my career out with no responsibility, absolutely none at all. But the call on my heart was to do X, Y, and Z. Then it's time to do this. Then it's time to go interview for this job. Then it's time. We all have that moment that you can either be obedient to, and I think that's the deception of the enemy. Because sometimes the enemy, the funny thing about the enemy is we always picture him with horns and a pitchfork. But oftentimes, it is often easier to go with the enemy than it is to actually obey and follow God. Because he'll hang things out in front of us that this is the path of least resistance. This is the path of more money. This is the path of more people, more influence, more this. This is the easiest way because you're speaking what people want to hear. But when you do it God's way, sometimes it's more difficult because you're saying things people don't want to hear. You're going out and doing not the normal way. Could you imagine, watching Jesus perform some of the miracles he did, or the taboos that he crossed over on lines where he healed lepers, when he touched lepers, when he talked to women, spoke to women, went to met with Gentiles, went out. I mean, he did things that were taboo, that were not norm, but it was obedience. It was in line with what the Father had created and sent him here for. And we often just won't do those things. We struggle. And then we go back to like Moses, is we minimize our mission. We minimize our mission because we feel like we're not qualified enough, because you look back into your little trunk of life and you see all the devastation and the wrongs and the disobedience and the ugliness and the trash that you've been bringing on your life. And so then you minimize who you are, and then you realize I can't even take that step because I'm not even qualified to take that step. But yet God has still said, I'm not asking you if you're qualified. I'm telling you that you are qualified. I am calling you. Are you going to be obedient to the call? And so Moses has that moment, the challenge of obedience. Further on in that scripture, immediately, Moses runs into his first sets of trouble. Even though God had already foreshadowed and told him, Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Oh Lord, why have you brought trouble upon this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble upon us, upon this people, and you have not rescued your people at all. God, you've asked us to go do these things, and we've done these things, but nobody's listening. Nobody's coming. Nobody wants to do this. Nobody believes in the one. Nobody wants to step outside their comfort zone. Nobody, and Moses dealt with this consistently. This is a consistent thing with Moses throughout Exodus, that he constantly goes back and kind of foreshadowing in the future, because Moses is continually dealing with people. And people are hard to deal with. People whine, people complain, and the Israelites were no different. They got mad at Moses. They revolted against Moses. Some of the craziest things that you could read, if you just camped out in Exodus for a while and read Exodus, you'd be like, wow, people did that after they saw that? Or they did, and that's what they did. But Moses immediately comes. And so what happened was, Moses is obedient. Moses goes to Pharaoh. He confronts Pharaoh, and Pharaoh makes life harder on him, refuses to let the people go. And so Moses returns back to God, and he has this moment where he complains to God. Why? Why? I think we've all had that moment where we've gone back to God and said, why? I did what you asked me to do, and it's not working. It's not working. The person at work didn't change their attitude towards me. The business deal didn't go through, even though I did it the way you wanted me to. God, we waited all this time to sell our home. Why can't I sell my house? Like, that's just a personal story of ours. It's like we waited, did everything the way we felt God was leading us, and then you get a contract on the house, and then it falls through. But I believe it's a journey. It's a path of growth. Like, obedience leads to growth. When you obey, if you can start taking little steps of obedience and start obeying, because ultimately obeying is faith. Why? Because you surrender to put your faith in somebody else. Because most of the time when we aren't obedient, it's because we believe we can do it better. Or I'm above it. I mean, why did Adam and Eve go eat from the tree? Because they wanted to know the tree of knowledge. They wanted to know themselves, the difference between good and evil. They were deceived. And then they were opened up to everything. Oftentimes our children don't listen to us because they believe they know better sometimes. And then there's those great moments as parents that sometimes we can sit back and go, told you so. I absolutely told you so. So you won't listen to me. Told you that's how it would be. I think God does that quite often with us. And I think that sometimes later in life when we all have those awakening moments and we can look back, we see God in every one of those moments. Like when you have that reality check and you can look back at some of the choices you made, you see those acts of where God was trying to lead you, but you chose to go a different route in the first place. And because of that simple lack of obedience, it took you a different route. And even though we didn't obey, God still doesn't abandon. And even right now, God doesn't abandon them. He listens to them. See, faith is often grown in the valley. We've talked about that several times. We often think that our faith is higher on the mountaintop, but in reality, your faith is growing more when it's in the valley, when you meet those frustrations, because that's when you're completely relying on Him. And so, what I believe, and Moses has this moment with God, and he's venting to God. And God often, God is going to respond, and I'm going to share that with you, but it's when you're in the midst of some of your troubles of whether you obey or you don't obey, especially like this ministry. When we stepped out to do this ministry, I was the last person to jump out and say, let's do it. Had all the plans, had it written down in notebooks, but I was terrified. I was afraid. I was afraid to obey what God had asked me to do. I was comfortable. I was fine. Had my disputes, but I can stick it out. I could do this, but God kept pushing, and then finally I'm just going to share it. Like when you don't obey God, when it's a specific call on your life, you can see the overflow of your heart flows over onto other people. I think the overflow of our disobedience flows onto other people too. I saw that what my disobedience was doing to my family. I saw that my wife stopped going to church, period. Because she had already decided that it's time. Whether she wanted to commit to a ministry outright, she had already decided. Well, what happened because she stopped? My children stopped. And then at some point, you have to step back and go, I'm the last person here, and honestly, this is all on me. Because I'm still going. I'm still going to church. But if I can't be the leader of my household, how can I be a leader of a congregation? How can I be a leader in my community if you can't lead your home? And so ultimately, your disobedience, when you choose to be disobedient to the calling that God has on you individually, it will overflow and affect everything else around you. Whether you want to admit to that or not, but you'll be able to see that. And so I think that God often takes those moments to grow our faith. It's a journey of growth as you step out in that act of obedience and experience these hardships. Like this was hard. I couldn't imagine standing in front of Pharaoh, a man that considered himself a god, and telling him, let my people go, and this is why, and let us go worship another god. And well, I'm your God. No, you're not our God. Let us go worship our God. And standing in front of him, probably boot shaking, because everything we know about Moses at that time is he wasn't a brave, well-spoken man. He probably shaking and quaking, and had Aaron standing beside him and speaking for him and all this stuff. But it's in this moment that I believe that God, because God responds to him. This is how I think God works sometimes. He says, show me, God, show me your faith, and I'll show you my faithfulness. Why is it? See, faith is believing in things that you can't see. None of us have ever seen God physically, but we believe God. Hebrews 11, all the great faithful warriors and heroes of our faith, a lot of them believed before they saw or did. Let's go back to Abraham and sacrificing Isaac. Like he was willful to do that. We could dig into that and dive into that. Like, why would God ask him to do that? Why would God ask him to do that? Very promise that God fulfilled, but he had faith enough and he obeyed. And I'm not even going to, I shouldn't even brought that because that's a whole other topic. But when you think about it, show me your faith. God is waiting for you to take a step of faith. And he will show you his faithfulness to you. He will show. I will show you my faithfulness, and he does that. He comes out to Moses. Moses comes to him. Moses vents to him, and and God responds to him. And God is waiting to respond to each and every one of us. Like I remember the last thing that most families ever give up to God is their finances. When you finally surrender your finances to God, that's usually the last thing in your faith walk that you surrender, because finances is where I have control of my finances. I can decide what I spend on, what I don't spend on. And I remember my wife being the accountant, when we made that decision as a family, it was a struggle for her to let go. And I remember, as a dual income family, it was a considerable amount of money to get us where to be right biblically. And I remember the first time we ever cut that check, we witnessed a miracle happen that week. So then, as we started moving in faith and taking steps of obedience, and then we started moving into God implored us to do with our Christmas offering at our previous church. And I remember, usually we sat down together and we talked about it, but we were in a huge season of growth for her and I personally, and faithfulness and trying to be right and do things right. That I remember we sat down and I completely surrendered to her. I said, I believe God had led me to say to her, I think this is a big step for you. You choose how much we give. I just ask that it's not less than what we did previously. I'll never forget that what she did, and I remember when she wrote the check and she came to me and said, "Do you want to see it?" I said, "I want to see it. That's between you and God." But she sends this check in, which was a considerable amount of money. I promise you, the very following week, that very week, after my wife, because I don't care about money. If you ask me how much I make at work, I can't tell you. I don't care. I can tell you my salary. I don't pay attention to it. I don't spend it. I don't care about it as long as I got things that I need. I just don't know. Shame me for that, for not being an adult. I just don't know it. But I remember Carrie did that. And that very week, we had overpaid insurance for like a year or something like that. And we got this check that reimbursed. It was for the exact penny that she had wrote the check for. God's like saying, if you just show me your faith and that you believe in me, and I will show you my faithfulness. I will provide. See, we forget oftentimes on the other side of obedience that God will already provide everything that we need, even though it may not be received. Moses is stepping out in faith to do the right thing because God has called him to do it, but he's not receiving that immediate return. But it's not on you or me, it's on God to turn other people. Like that this room right now is not filled with people. It doesn't bother me at all. Because it's not dependent on you, it's dependent on him. I'm doing it because it's what he's asked us to do. And we do what he's called us to do. And we take a step in faith to do what he's asked us to do. What you guys do with it is on you. Same thing, like you can spend your hardest thing about our children is letting our children go. It's the hardest thing in life to do, I think, in my personal opinion, is to let them go. But all I can do is be obedient to God in my raising them. And then at some point, Connor's got to be on his own. And hopefully I did my best and laid that foundation. But show me your faith, and I will show you my faithfulness. This is how God responds to Moses. And I can't think of another uplifting where this is like a moment where God smacks Moses and says, listen to me. I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them. And I will redeem you with the outstretched arm and with the mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from the yoke of the Egyptians. I mean, I love that. I will. See, we want to put things on us like it's on us, and if it's just on us, then life is discouraging. But if you can tap into it and realize, I will. God says, I will. I have asked you, Aaron, to do this, and I will make this happen. Not on your terms, not on your time, not with your influence. I will do it. I will do it. You just do with what I've given you. You just do what I've asked you to do, and I will do the rest. This is a man that we know that Scripture kind of tells us that he didn't speak well, whether he had a speech impediment, whether he wasn't confident enough. We see a man that later through Scripture that acts out of emotion, who doesn't make the right steps. We see a man that got frustrated and broke the tablets. We see a man that ultimately squanders the promise of God, that he can't even enter the promised land that was promised to him and his people. But God said, I will. I will do this. I will take care of you. I will be your God. I will redeem you. I will do this. You are my people. See, when you think of the things that you've been asked to do, the intimate discussions and the lead, how God has been leading you, where He's leading you, where He's led you to church, where He's led you to get involved in ministries, where He's led you to work in your occupation, where He's led you to bless somebody, where He's led you to raise somebody, where He's led you to speak up and stand out on certain issues or whatnot. God is saying, if you're obedient to me on the back end of that, I will. I will. But a lot of us are just like Moses. We're living in that season of doubt. Like, we want to see it right now. Like, God, I would do it if I knew that Willie would listen to me in the back end. Like, he would follow me. God, I'll do this if I know that in the future you'll fill it on to it. Or we can make a sustainable living, right? God, I'll cut that check to that ministry program if you'll give me a return, if you'll give it, or they'll put my name on their wall, right? Don't we do that sometimes? Like, we come with our own contingency plans, like things that we want out of it. And God is saying, listen, it's not, I will. If you just do it, I will take that and do something with it. And so, we have the power. It's kind of, we have that power to take that captive out. I love 2 Corinthians. Paul puts this in his letters. Take captive every thought. Take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. I love the word captive. Because I don't know about you, when you move into making the decision or you move into a moment of obedience, there's always some thinking that went in before that. Now, when you can think of take it captive, take that thought captive. Think about it. Hold on to it. Try not to let the emotions sway your fear of it, but take it captive. And then revert it back to the Word of God. And is it where God wants you to go? See, some of the problems, which in the end I'll talk about this. I shared it with the team yesterday, my thoughts on discernment and discerning what God has been telling me. I think it has something to do with obedience, because a lot of times we get confused with what God is telling us to do. And if it's the right thing, or how do I know when God is speaking to me? But that all comes with taking everything captive. You have the ability to take it. You have the power to take it, to own it, to obey it. It all comes down to a choice. And it's obedience, even if it doesn't feel like it. When you're obedient to God, it is a connection. Obedience is the connection. Obedience is the connection in a relationship. Obedience is what makes a successful marriage. Continue on. Obedience is a successful marriage. When I'm obedient to my wife, we're more connected. When my wife is more obedient to me, we're connected. When we're angry at each other, there's a less of a connection. When you're angry with your friends, there's less of a connection. When you're angry at your church and you don't go back to your church, there's a connection. When you're angry at God, there's lack of connection. See, in obedience, going back to that starting line, there's a connection with God. And in that, your freedom is directly. So when you're thinking about obedience and freedom are like, you think of them as polar opposites. But there's a connection between your obedience and freedom. Freedom is directly connected to your obedience, especially when it comes to following God. If you can be obedient to God, God promises freedom on the other side of that. It may not be the freedom you desire. Maybe you wanted to live in a mansion, but God wants you to live in a ranch. Right? But maybe you wanted Jackson wants his new car. He's turned into a car guy. Like, maybe go to a car show in Florida. He likes a Lamborghini. Like, I don't know where that came from. I have to have a conversation with whoever taught him what a Lamborghini is. But maybe God wants you to drive a Honda. There is freedom in obedience. And I know that even though sometimes I don't like doing the things that my wife wants me to do, or I don't like sucking up and doing things like for my children, but I know on that there's freedom in obeying. Because when Mama's happy, everybody's happy. Even though I didn't want to go to that game or sit in those stands, or even though my son's not going to play or whatnot, but he comes off with a smile because his dad was there, there's freedom in that. The same thing comes when there's freedom and you listen to God and you do what God has asked you to do and you step out into it, even though it may not directly put you on a pedestal. Anybody, and I think mostly everybody in here has been involved in ministry at some point, there's freedom in that feeling when you see things go in that direction. when you stepped out in faith and you obeyed, and then you saw what God was doing with it and through it. It may not have been a direct reward for you, but you got to see something awesome happen within it. You know, I think that all the time that it's like in Moses' story, obviously Pharaoh doesn't listen, right? Pharaoh doesn't listen. God uses his power. He brings the plagues, and the plagues come. And then ultimately, going back to that very first set of scriptures in chapter 4 that I shared, or chapter 5, where God foreshadows, I'll take the firstborn. Ultimately, we come over to the Passover meal. And it's, I often think that sometimes, like when I was reading through this and thinking how to lay it out, and it's like you're either passed over or you're secured. You know, you're like sometimes, like I think of how how the angel of death came through and over the Israelites, how as they prepped for the first Passover, and that they passed over them because their freedom was secured in obedience because they had listened to God and they sacrificed their lamb. I mean, could you think of, like, what if God right now said, listen, I'm going to need you to sacrifice a lamb. I'm going to need you to paint your door. Like, not just paint 2 posts, not just a little dab. I want you to go all over. And I want you to shut your whole family inside and not come out. And then there were other stringent things they had to do. You know there was some guy that's probably like me going, why? Like, why do I got to do this? Like, God, this makes no sense. Why do I got to paint my door? Is that going to come off or is it going to stain my door? You know, there's always one of those people. And then hopefully there's a family member and there was obedient. You're going to do this, and we're going to come in here and shut this door, and we're going to be, you know, like oftentimes we miss those moments. Like you can either be passed over and secured, right? And so what we find on and then further is this is what the Lord says about midnight. And I'm going to give you guys a word as we go to close. About midnight, I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the firstborn son of the slave girl who is at her handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well. There will be a loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there has ever been or ever will be again. But, back to those buts, among the Israelites, not a dog will bark at any man or animal. And then you will know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. The Lord makes a distinction between those who obey and those who disobey. And as absolute as that sounds, it is. There is a distinction between those who will obey and who won't obey. And so I think about that sometimes as people come and seek counseling or they're talking. And sometimes it does come down to a simple act of obedience. Are you obeying? Have you done what God has asked you to do? Do you listen? Well, how do I know? Have you gone back to the Word? Have you listened to the Word? Have you read the Word? Are you reading the Bible? Are you looking for counsel? Are you seeking counsel from those that are around you? There is a distinction between those who obey and those who disobey. It's one of my favorite scriptures in the book. Is a distinction because not only is it like a distinction, it also lets me know that I'm distinct, that there's something special about me, that because I have chosen to follow God and I've chosen to make myself obedient to God, and I don't do it all the time. Like I'm just as like everybody else. I fail and do my way at times, and then God quickly reminds me, you know, because I have that connection with God, and my freedom is directly connected to obeying God. And then I also see on the back end of that God, when I do it His way, there's something distinct about the way my life is lived. There's something distinct about my family, the way that we walk. And that distinction overflows to other people around us, and hopefully we can share that with other people. And when people ask, what's so different about you? I can say, let me tell you what's so different about us, is that we have God in our life. And that leads to good discussions. It leads to open conversations. But it all starts with a simple act of obedience. And see, His way to freedom that's His way to freedom. Because you know, after that happens, there's a confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh. And Moses comes in and Pharaoh says, take your people and go. Get out. Leave. Don't come back. Although he does have a change of heart and goes after him. And then we see God's faithfulness again. When God brings down the waters on the Egyptian army and wipes them out again. Because there's a distinction between, I mean, could you imagine following Moses out and then coming to the sea and they're all standing there, now what? And then Moses, in his faithfulness, steps into the water, raises up his staff, and the waters part. It took a step of faithfulness to step into the water, and it took a step of faithfulness to obey. And then when he stepped in there in faith, God's faithfulness came through and parted the waters. And his people were free. There was freedom. His way was freedom. John 3:3 says this, he must become greater. He must become greater, and you must become less. See, when we surrender and we move into obedience, we are lessening our position. We are lessening our significance because we're surrendering to something greater. Surrender is not a word anybody likes to hear. Surrender is humbling. Surrender is giving. These are all unpopular words in our culture and our society. But ultimately, that is what God has asked you to do. That's why I'm so against any of our pride movements. I just feel that. Because even ones that don't fight Bible or that don't go against Scripture or anything, God has told us that pride is the root of all evil. It's humility, it's humbleness, it's surrender, it's communication, it's connection that changes everything. Not pride. Pride divides, and we're seeing that right now. Pride divides us. When we come at everything with pride, like I tell this to officers all the time, what is your arguing helping this conversation? What is your argument? How does that help anybody? I probably shouldn't share this, but one of our local high schools wore Black Lives Matter shirts to one of their basketball games. Right? You have a right to say, you have the right to speak however you feel. I do believe that our school should be a protected place where we protect those things. But let me tell you how I'm lashing out at my law enforcement folks because, like, I look at us as adults and like as an example, but how I was supported, which I appreciate. Our department came out, but ultimately, what it came down to, there are still hurt feelings over that, and I'm just like, listen, these are young men. They don't. I know what they're trying to say. They just don't know what they're saying. And at what point do we act like the adults? I'm not going to push up my pride and stand up taller and face them like this. We'll make more steps by being humble and opening up a connection and a conversation than putting up a brick wall and saying, because now I'm just feeding into what you think about me. And I think that with a lot of our things, that whether it's be a women's movement or voting movement, all these voting things, Democrat, but it doesn't matter. First Amendment, Second Amendment, all these different arguments we're having, it doesn't matter. But when we come at things that are private, that is not how God wants us to communicate. It's not how He wanted us. That's not how He planned us to communicate. He planned us to connect with one another. I mean, the greatest commandment of all is to love the Lord your God with all your might, with all your strength, right? And the second is just like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. How am I loving you, Aaron, if I come at you prideful and condemn you for the way that you think? Now, I may not agree with what you're thinking, and I will try and talk to you civilly, but it's the same thing with Christianity. For those Bible thumpers out there that want to argue and scream Christ from the corners, which I'm all about evangelism, but when you're offending people and you're attacking people, God doesn't need you to fight for Him like that. If God needs you to fight, He'll make you a Joshua and He'll send you out to fight. What He needs you to do is connect with people. You know, we're a church that invites alternative lifestyles because this is where you need to be. By casting you aside and telling you you don't belong isn't helping anybody get where you need to be. The goal of the kingdom is to bring as many people into it as possible. And make sure it reaches the far ends of the earth. But we gotta be humble. And we gotta be able to surrender. And we have to be obedient. Be obedient to that call to love our neighbor as ourselves. Right? And it's difficult and it's hard, but that's where freedom. Because when you surrender, you're becoming less. He must be greater, you must be less. He must be the mission, I must be just the instrument. I just got to be the vessel. He is the one pushing it. He is the one guiding it. He must become greater, I must become less. I must be able to trust Him, step out faithfulness, and trust Him for the rest. See, we got to get to that point. And so during the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses, and he tells him to up and lead my people and the Israelites and go, worship the Lord as you have requested, take your flocks and your herds, as you have said, and go. And then, this is the great part, and also bless me. Also, but he didn't want to forget that part. After God had done all these amazing things, he said, God, after God bless me. Isn't that incredible? And ultimately, he turns and changes his mind and he chases him down, and he still loses. But you never know when you will have that opportunity to bless somebody. So if you go ahead and close your eyes, I just want to wrap up in prayer. And I also wanted to just add this. As you're thinking about this act of obedience, and as we continue through this series, as we talk about the pillars of what focused ministry is, oftentimes we struggle with this thought, with this idea of what is God telling me? What does God want me to do? And so I had this moment while I was in Florida through conversations with a family member talking about discernment. Like, how do I know what God is telling me? And so there's a scripture in 1 Kings, and they don't give the man of God a name. The man of God doesn't have a name, but Jeroboam, King Solomon, let me paint the picture. King Solomon has died. His son the son and Jeroboam are fighting over the kingdom. Jeroboam approaches the king and says, listen, your dad's weight, his yoke was heavy on us. Can you lighten the load for us? And so what Solomon's son does is he consults King Solomon's wise elders, and he talks to them. And they advise him what to do to lighten the yoke on those people. But, like many of us, he doesn't listen to them. He goes to what's comfortable to him. He goes to the people that are near to him, his friends that won't speak the truth to him. They'll speak what he wants to hear. And so he speaks to him what he wants to hear, and he tells him, and he leads him a different direction. And so what happens is Solomon's son it tells the people of Israel that I'm going to make your yoke even heavier. And what ends up happening is they divide the kingdom. The kingdom is divided into Judah and Israel, and they're separated. And you have two warring nations. And then it's in this moment that Jeroboam goes to Bethel, and he creates an altar, and he starts some idolatry factions and blessings and sacrifices. And so a man of God is ordained by God to approach him and tell him what he's doing is wrong. And so this man of God is given strict orders to go to Jeroboam, and he tells Jeroboam, just like Moses did to Pharaoh, that what you're doing is wrong, and that God will do this, he will destroy this, he will make this happen. And so the man of God was given strict instructions by God. He said, do not eat, do not drink, and do not stay, and do not return from which you have come. Meaning you have to leave and go a different direction. Don't eat from this place, don't drink from this place. So he does that, he obeys. And he moves in faithfulness. He faithfully confronted Jeroboam. He faithfully leaves without drinking or eating and goes. But then, another prophet goes after him. Here's about the man of God. He goes after this man, and he tells him, hey, come back to my house. Come to my church and rest and enjoy a meal. And the man of God repeats back to this other prophet and says, no. The Lord of God has told me that I must not eat, and I must not drink, and I must leave. But then he's deceived. He's deceived by this other pastor. He's deceived by this other elder. He's deceived by this other person of trust. And he's told, no, listen, God told me that you should come back. And so he brings the man of God back to his house, and the man of God gives in, and he eats and he drinks, and then God punishes him. And God sends a lion, and the lion attacks him on the road, and he kills him. Right? It seems drastic, it seems awful, but listen, your disobedience will cost you. Your disobedience will cost you. And so what I'm trying to get through to you in this moment of discernment is, listen, if it is something that God has called you to do, he is speaking to you and through you. It doesn't matter if I tell you. It doesn't matter if another pastor tells you. It doesn't matter if an elder or somebody you hold in high esteem. If it is intimately meant for you, it will come through you from him. You have to learn to discern what God is asking you to do. I'm so happy and so excited to say that Lauren has joined our team. She is going to be taking over worship and taking it to and the creative process and making it what she's wanted. But I will always respect her. When I approached her like a month or almost 2 months ago, and she was on my mind, and I approached her and I said, Lauren, I believe God brought you to my life years ago for a purpose, and I believe the purpose is now. And I've been putting off reaching out to you, and even that whole conversation is God ordained. But I will always remember her response. It's her response in that moment, rather than accept a position or say, yeah, I'm in, or yeah, you're going to give me all of this creative ability and power, and I can do this and do this. I mean, basically, she's the only one that has the knowledge to do it. No, she says, listen, she's obeying what God had placed on her heart. She said, I'm not ready yet. I need to make sure that I need to confer with God. I need to pray about it. I need to think about it. And then I need to obey. Ultimately, she took her time. And then she's obeying God and following God. She discerned for herself what God was leading her to do. Not what a pastor was trying to get her to do. Not what a team was trying to give her to do. Not even when speaking of how beautiful her voice is or how amazing she is. She focused at her young age on what God wanted her to do. The power of discernment. See, when you move into seasons of obedience, you've got to obey God because it's what He has asked you to do. I can't make that decision for you. Only you can make that decision. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together, Father. I pray that this message resonates in our hearts and in our minds, Father. Help us to follow the path that you have for us. Help us, Father, with all the noise in our life, all the things that are going on, Father. Help us discern what is right and what is wrong, what the path is that you want us to take. Help us to have those influences that are speaking into us. But Father, let us be able to tear through those, to see what you're saying through it, Father. Father, help us to take that step in faith, to take that step in obedience, to embrace your faithfulness, to let us act out in our faith so that we can receive and we can see your faithfulness at work. Just like Moses did. He had his doubts. He had his frustration. He had his fears. He had his inadequacies. He felt unqualified, Father, but you still worked up something great in him. You said, I will. Right now you're saying to us, I will. I just need you to go. I just need you to do. I just need you to believe. I just need you to surrender. And I will do this. Father, help us to step out in faith to the next step in each of our lives. Help us to step out in faith with Focus Ministry, to get out into a community that so severely needs you. Father, help us meet individuals' needs. Help us push people to the next level, to help them find that connection so that they can find obedience and freedom in that obedience, to seeing you work in their life. Father, help us to continue to do the things that you've asked us to do. Father, help us to take every thought captive and make it obedient to you. Father God, I know that there are struggles in this room. I know there are hardships in this room, Father. I pray over those. I pray for those blessings to appear. But Father, I do know through what you've taught me that it comes first with a step of obedience, which is wrapped up in surrender. Father, help us to surrender to your call. Help us to follow that path and be who you created us to be. Fill us with our purpose and help us solidify that purpose and trust it in all faithfulness and be who you want us to be. In Jesus' name, amen.